Welcome to part 2 of the conversation with Beth Thomas, director and co-founder of Neuroinclusive Link Ltd. In this segment, Beth delves deeper into the unique challenges and strengths that neurodivergent individuals, particularly those with ADHD, bring to the workplace. She shares her insights on how to foster a more inclusive environment that celebrates neurodiversity. So let's talk about hyperfocus. I feel like hyperfocus is very different for different people. Shall we compare how a hyperfocus works? Do you want to go first? And I'll be like, okay.
Yeah, I'd love to. So hyperfocus for me is a bit of an interesting one. I don't resonate personally with this idea that we can consciously control it. And for me personally, that is certainly not an experience I ever have. So hyperfocus for me occurs normally with two different types of situations. Either it's something super within my interest realm and I am, going down those rabbit holes. I am absolutely there in that material, whether or not that's kind of scrolling through different articles or having a look on my computer, or reading, or whatever it is I'm doing with that material, and I will absolutely not notice anything around me. So that includes the time passing, not that I have an awareness of that usually anyway, but I will really struggle with things like noticing the time, picking up on my body cues, and I can get really, really stuck into that for hours and hours on end. So it happens in that situation where it is something of a particular interest. What can be really frustrating about that one is I might be halfway through a conversation with someone and someone says something that sparks me or says something within my interest realm that I actually don't know about. And then I'm like, oh, I have to find that out. And I feel so compelled to find it out in that moment that even halfway through a conversation with someone, I'm, sometimes literally doing it there and then getting absolutely sucked into it without that awareness of kind of what that's looking like outside of it. So we've got that. And then the other type is if I am in a state of urgency. So I have a deadline that is looming and I have procrastinated, probably avoided the task, maybe ruminated and freaked out about it a little bit, and then kind of come to do the work and been like, I now need some magic, an enormous amount of work in a very short space of time. And in those moments, hyperfocus can kick in because, as I say, I've got that really conscious awareness of a lack of time. So not necessarily aware that I can notice the time passing. I just know I don't have enough of it. And so in those moments, again, that hyperfocus can kick in and I am glued to what I am doing. And so that usually is creating content or let's say materials. So things like disability impact training or anything that's maybe requiring fairly significant cognitive load is what I'm likely to maybe avoid doing in a timely fashion. And so leaving that to the last minute in a sort of very classic fashion, then I'm like, oh my goodness, I've got so much to do. I'm getting right stuck into it. And again, I'm not noticing the time pass. I'm not noticing my body cues. I'm not necessarily regulating myself. So for me personally, because of those differences, when that hyperfocus does happen, irrespective of the circumstance, I can get quite overstimulated coming out of it because it's sort of everything I've not paid attention to or I've not noticed kind of starts hitting me all at once. And so actually hyperfocus for me can be quite dangerous because if I get stuck into that for, any length of time, when I'm coming out of hyperfocus, I can be incredibly dysregulated. I can be quite overstimulated. I can be a bit irritable. So yeah, it's a real challenge for me. How about you?
Focus is strange. I agree with you. I don't think it's something that people can control. It's just a state of mind that, it's like fight or flight. It's like, when I hyper focus, I can hyper focus with anything and everything if I'm interested or if I have a plan. I agree with you. I have the plan, the urgency thing. And with my autism, and my ADHD, which comes with that impulsiveness, my autism with that, lack of danger. I guess both of them have that in common. I once decided I wanted somebody to park the car. This was when I was in a care home, parked the car. I got out the car, walked across two main roads
Oh,
because I saw a daffodil that I wanted to pick through the window. And I walked. And, because back then, like, I was known as somebody who, like impulsively wanted to kill herself. And I would do it regularly, multiple times a day. That everybody was like, oh my God, what's happening? But my key worker, who's really good at understanding autism and like ADHD, she was like, she's not going to do that. She's very focused on something. And I was like, I went and picked that flower. And I went right back. I was like, I know what I want to do. I'm going to go do it. Same with work. It's like, if it interests me enough, I would do it. And I feel like deadlines works with me. I like, time to do it. But if I had time to do it, I would stare at it like for hours and be like, what am I supposed to do with this? This is overwhelming. Too many words. Figure this shit out. Wait, that's my responsibility? No, 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 no. But last minute things, great. And I feel like it's with my hyper focus, like I'm great. I don't feel my bodily functions. I don't, I will, or even if I do feel it, I'll be like 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. And then it's like 5 hours has already gone.
yeah.
And I just feel like there's often this like thing of like, I can't get out of it unless there's some strong sensory input that I'm receiving. And then I'm like, what's this? As quickly as I can get into the hyper focus, I can quickly get out of it. It's like it is, once I'm not hyper focused, I'm not hyper focused. I will literally, whilst people are having a conversation with me, I'll just walk away because I just realized, oh, I had to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And they just watch me and they're like, we're just having a conversation. And I'm like, and I just look back at them. I'm not processing what they're saying. Like, look at them as to acknowledge what they said. And I continue walking to do whatever I want. And I'm like, and then like a few hours later, I'll go back and be like, yeah, what did you say? And they're like, I'm just like, this is like not working out. And I feel like it's very obvious, I feel like, in mental health, if you have ADHD, especially with that hyperfocus when it's come to like suicidal behavior or anything like that, when you want something, you go for it. And that impulsiveness and that hyperfocus, and there's no danger, there's no nothing. And you're like, this is what I want. I'm gonna get it, and nobody's gonna get in my way. And it's like, and I feel like people don't talk about the mental health element when it comes to ADHD, because that's what initially got me diagnosed with. No, that's what got me diagnosed with ADHD. Is my mental health. And I was like, I didn't know this could happen. I knew that my autism was a right fit for me, but I didn't think it was the only fit for me. I was like, this is something else. And it's like, it's just, like, same with food. I would love a food. Like, right now, it's like pasta. I didn't end up eating it. I had to throw the whole thing away because it had chunks in the sauce. They changed it and they didn't tell anyone. How rude. Tesco's, get your shit together. Like, honestly, so I was like, I was looking forward to this. This is going to be the greatest thing. I was going to eat this for 15 days straight. Now, because there was chunks in it, I couldn't eat any of it.
Oh, I know, man.
And so this hyper focus that I had with the pasta, because of that aversion, now I would not eat it for another like 6-8 months, maybe a year.
That's really interesting. But I mean, it makes sense, right? It makes complete sense. And that's kind of a little bit how things like hyperfocus can also tie into and be impacted by things like sensory overload and, difficulty with making transitions, obviously aligned with our executive functioning challenges. So it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's like crazy how it manifests really, really differently to different neurodivergent people. And I've noticed that neurotypical people cannot hyperfocus. Like they can concentrate. I feel like people don't think concentration and hyperfocus is the same thing. It's not. It's a very like intense, if you're going to compare it to concentration, it's a very extreme form of concentration. And I feel like, and I'm looking at somebody, I'm like, why are you not in? Because I recognize certain like passing the behavior, and I'm like, if I was like this, I'll be doing this. Why are you not doing this? And I was like, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, interesting. But yeah, I feel like, yeah, I want, like, it's crazy. Yeah. What is your, like, do you notice that the intensity and frequency of your hyper focus, like, differs depending on?
That's a really good question. And yes, I would say so. I mean, I've not thought too much about that until this specific question. So we're going to think about things as we go along. So we'll see what comes out. This will be interesting. But yes, I think as with most of my neurodivergent related challenges, they are often impacted by the various things happening around me. So as an example, if I am quite low on things like my energy and my capacity, even things like my menstrual cycle as well, because let's normalize being able to talk about that freely too, all have an impact. And if I am quite low, let's say on those kinds of things, and I'm, let's say struggling a little bit to kind of keep on top of managing them all, then I will notice a more sort of destructive version of hyperfocus kicking in. So almost kind of like a hyperfocus tendency around doom scrolling and getting really, kind of stuck into that, and, it not necessarily being a productive form of hyperfocus. And I find it often harder to recognize, kind of shifting into and coming out of hyperfocus. So that can be quite challenging in a sort of a little bit more of a negative way, I'm going to say, because then I can get frustrated, and then it kind of, exacerbates my issues with my self-confidence already. And, oh, Beth, why have you done this? So, that kind of happens. And then, yeah, if I'm not having perhaps so many of those struggles, typically the hyperfocus tends to be a little bit, let's say, more productive. So sort of more towards the work I need to do or that kind of thing. But, that being said, it's not something I can determine, as we've mentioned earlier. So I would say that, yes, there are certain things that are more likely to impact it, but there are more things that are more likely to impact it negatively than positively.
I feel like it's like when I feel like there's people often think of it as a positive thing. They're like, this is your superpower. No, it's not. This is just part of who I am. And I'm like, it's people don't understand how damaging it can be, not just to your mental health or emotional well-being, but also your physical health. Like,
Yep.
if you're not understanding your bodily functions, you could, have, you can soil yourself, you can, develop UTIs, all
Yep.
these things that people don't talk about.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, it's hyper-focused, I can concentrate, I can get so much work done. That's all people see. And I'm like, there's so much more. And it's gotten to put, then you're like on, and then people don't think about it. They just say, okay, you've got a UTI. Be careful, concentrate. Okay, so then I need to remember to take my antibiotics for 10 days, which with my ADHD, I know I can't.
Yeah.
And then I have to call with my GP to review the 10-day course to make sure things. So now I need to book an appointment. It's like all these things happen, and for stuff like that, I can't hyper focus. Yeah, I'm like there's no hyper focus there.
Absolutely, yes. Couldn't agree more. And
Probably focus is mundane.
Yeah, it's really challenging. And I think you hit on a really, really important point there in terms of talking about some of the potential impacts and consequences that not enough people talk about, because again, a lot of misinformation, kind of sensationalizes a lot of these types of aspects like hyperfocus in the media. And the reality of it is that, we can't always control it. They do have even more devastating impacts on our potentially already limited capacity to kind of recognize interoceptive, kind of features of our life and what we're going through. And the impact that then has absolutely has consequences and can be devastating. And it's a bit of a frustrating sort of never-ending cycle, if you will, because it's not necessarily something we can regulate with ease. So it's also not a linear process in terms of saying, oh, okay, now I know about hyperfocus, I'm going to be able to totally manage it. that's also not a thing either. You know, we might be able to develop our awareness about something, but that doesn't then actually make it easier to put strategies in place to manage it. You know, it's not a linear journey whatsoever.
Yeah. Do you hyper focus with? I feel like there's like a hyper focus when it comes with. Was it? I asked you before we started hitting record. Do you have a preference? Like, are you particular about like water brands? I feel like there can be a hyper focus that people don't talk about, and I don't. And I feel like it's a combination of the autism and the ADHD thing.
Yeah.
It's like I feel like this is a really common one that I feel like they can get people to understand. Tomato ketchup or like baked beans, you're always gonna get Heinz.
Yeah.
It's an automatic Heinz, and people don't see that as like a, oh, I need to have this. Oh, it tastes different. Because it's just a small part of their life. It's like that. You're not gonna get like a, I don't know, some Marks and Spencer baked beans, are you? You're gonna always go for the Heinz no matter what, because you know that taste, you know how it feels, you know they don't change their stuff often. That'll be a bad marketing decision, but it's like I'm like,
No, totally. It's
I'm
kind of
like
somewhere between focus and safety as well, isn't it? It's that kind of safety, familiar, secure element of something and that trustability in it. And then kind of that combined with the hyper focus can absolutely create, you know, sometimes fairly rigid patterns. And actually, yeah, in that capacity, I definitely resonate with it. Maybe not particularly for, let's say, specific water, but in other areas, yes, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, and I feel like people say, you know, people with ADHD like are not attentive to details, but we can be really, really attentive to details.
Oh, absolutely. And this is another really huge point that, if anything, hyperfocus challenges the medical model of how ADHD is viewed, because quite literally in the name, it says attention deficit, but really it's an attention difference. It is a variation in the way that we can pay attention. We can pay attention, we pay attention differently. And as with something like hyperfocus, we can absolutely pay very intense attention to something. But it's not always necessarily the thing that we should, and you know, for those listening, I've kind of said that loosely with quotation marks, should be paying attention to. So sure, if you want me to look like I'm paying attention to something super boring and not at all within my specific interest realm, I'm going to really struggle with that unless there is the, you know, acceptance and embracement of fidget toys and stimming and other types of movement that's going to help me to stay in that moment as a present person, to focus and concentrate. That is a difference in attention, not a deficit. And that's another point I find very challenging.
And I feel like it's like that thing with people think as soon as you got a diagnosis, it's always less than or something, less than standard, less than. And I'm like, it's not. I feel like people need to stop thinking because something has a diagnosis, like it's a diagnosis or it's different, that is less than. It's like attention can be more. It's not always a deficit, but it can be a deficit. It just depends on the day, on the person, on the whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of my clients have the most incredible achievements to their name, and often because of the strengths that they've been able to leverage that are directly in association with their ADHD or other neurodivergent related experiences. And so, absolutely, yes, it can really be a strength. It's not always deficit less than. That is very much, you know, the kind of medical model of disability that we're so conditioned to believe is the only reality.
Yeah, we should like for our next like podcast like session, we should be like rewriting the DSM-5 criteria.
I am down for that, please, because it severely lacks most things it really should to be a robust set of criteria for anything. Absolutely, yes.
Controversial question. I don't know if it's controversial. I just said it to add some dramatic effects. Do you think DSM-5 criteria should have a separate criteria, like separate book for females?
This is interesting. I can see how it may be potentially controversial. So, okay, here's what I think. I think it doesn't necessarily need a separate one for females, because then we'd also need a separate one for transgender. We'd need a separate one for marginalized groups in the community. We'd need a set, you know, so we'd end up needing variations. What we do need is comprehensive, inclusive research conducted to finally understand ADHD and its varying intersectionalities, how it actually presents between all of these various differences with, you know, gender and sexuality and culture. And we need to gather all of that information and recreate the DSM criteria with all of this in mind, so that we don't necessarily have to have multiple separate forms of criteria per different group, but rather we actually have an inclusive criteria that can accurately assess this condition regardless of the intersectionality.
Definitely. Like hyperfocus, even though it has its strengths, it has its weaknesses, like we discussed. Like, what are some effective techniques for identifying and harnessing periods of hyperfocus to achieve peak productivity? And how can these techniques be tailored to individual needs? I know it differs person to person, but yeah.
I mean, it's a really good question. And, you know, as I'll always say, and will always continue to say, that you're absolutely right. It does really depend person to person. And I mean, it's not necessarily something I would must kind of train people to and encourage them to rely on, as it were, because from my personal experience, it has more detrimental impacts than it often does positive ones. However, we can look at, you know, potential ways to harness it. And that, for me, seems very based in developing that awareness. So being able to create that awareness that people can develop to be able to identify what hyperfocus looks like as it's starting to kick in. So, for instance, you know, being able to recognize what those features look like. So, for instance, if you're a fairly easily distracted person, are some of those extraneous distractions that would otherwise distract you starting to kind of slip away into the background? Are you noticing that you're getting a really intense level of focus that you can really feel is specific towards a particular thing? You know, can you recognize that you've started to kind of drop out of whatever it is you were doing before because you're coming into hyperfocus? So really building that awareness, but, you know, in terms of recognizing what that looks like, would certainly enable you to be more aware of it and therefore potentially able to harness it. And then in terms of looking at ways to channel it, I would say, again, it's that awareness piece and really being understanding of what that looks like for you, what your capacity looks like in that moment of hyperfocus, and what potentially might, let's say, derail that level of hyperfocus into something slightly more destructive. So, for example, if you have a tendency to hyperfocus, and if your phone is around you, and you know that you have a tendency to doom scroll, let's say, is perhaps can we look at taking the phone distraction away, put it on airplane mode, do something with it, you know, put it away from you so that when you are in that moment of hyperfocus, you're hyperfocusing productively on it. And then also building in some potential external supports to ensure that you're not sitting in hyperfocus for another detrimental period of time. So maybe that also needs an external timer to have a sort of body check in and say, you know, when was the last time you ate or something like that. So yeah, I'd say that's a bit of a challenging one because, as always, it depends on the person. And I also think it depends on the purpose as well, because if you're relying on hyperfocus to get the majority of your work done, then maybe it's also worth getting curious about why it is you feel you want to be relying on that hyperfocus and whether or not there's space that you can start working towards having a more balanced approach at doing things, which, although difficult, is absolutely possible.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I was thinking I'm really like hot, and then yeah, and I was thinking, I think SSRIs and the other one, SS whatever it is, makes you more hot because of the way the medication is, something along those lines. And I'm like, I'm feeling it.
I sympathize. It's so tough. I mean, I literally had my hair down early today and then was like, no, that is going to have to go up. I am super hot. Interestingly, as well, here's a fun fact for you. I can't remember the research. I'm sure there was some research behind this, or maybe it was just a therapist. I can't remember, but I will try and find it out for you and we see if we can stick it in the show notes. But I read somewhere fairly recently that because typically neurodivergent systems can struggle with things like interoception, it also means that we're at a higher risk of really struggling to regulate our body temperature. So it's another reason that neurodivergent people can typically tend to, let's say, regulate their body temperature, identify whether or not they're hot or cold, or, you know, kind of keep that regulated and struggle with getting too hot and too cold. I found that fascinating. Really, because I said, oh, well, no, that helps to understand for me personally why I basically only seem to operate in either, you know, extremity. I'm either like, you know, sweating and all of the attractive stuff that comes along with that and getting irritable, or I'm absolutely freezing and need, you know, 3 hot water bottles and an electric blanket.
No, well, I only work on one extreme, which is crazy. But that extreme is at the most extreme. Like, I am hot constantly. You know, 2017, you know, when we were having snow, I don't know if you remember, but there was like snow. Like, it was happening every day. It was good amounts of snow. I was like, so on our Urshline uniform, we have a shirt, we have a jumper, and then it's a blazer. I will take my blazer off, I will take my jumper off, because I will get so hot and it's snowing and it's minus like 5, 8, whatever it was. And I was like, you know what? I'm too hot. And literally everybody would be like, oh my God, are you going to get hot? Are you going to get, are you going to get cold? You're going to get a fever. I have not got ill in ages. But that is different. But like, I have not got ill.
Yeah.
Like, literally, I'm just like, I am hot and I'm going to be hot all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I like, for example, when I'm like using, like when I hurt my back, I want to use a hot water bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have a hot water bottle and I have my ice pack. Like, it's hot, it's cold. And I'm like, I can't regulate. And I feel like us not being able to regulate our body temperatures. Yeah, and I still do it. I don't wear my coats anywhere. Like 24/7, I'm in shorts and a vest if I'm inside. Because this is not for me. And I don't know if I'm doing some like, I don't know, betrayal to my heritage. I do come from Sri Lanka, but like probably it's a betrayal because I can't handle it. Like when people ask me, like people are like, "Oh, have you ever been to Sri Lanka? Do you recommend going?" I'm like, "No, you shouldn't go. It's hot." That's what I say, and I was like, "You shouldn't go. It's very hot." It's like, and I'm like, and they're like, "Oh, that's lovely." Yeah, going back to like the ADHD stuff. People making conversations with you, and like I feel like conversation and the social cues. I feel like lots of people with ADHD struggle with that. And when people are talking about the weather, and you're like, I don't like this. I hate the sun. But you want me to say, I love the sun. Oh my God, it's lovely. Oh my God, yes, Michaela. We've been waiting for this for like the last 40 years, Michaela. Like, oh my God, isn't this so lovely? Oh my God. I'm literally going to make a beach in my like garden. No, I hate the sun. Leave me alone. I don't want to talk about the weather. I don't care enough. If there's a volcano erupting and it's affecting the weather, do let me know.
Yeah.
But like other than that, do not let me know. And there's no volcano, so don't talk to me about the weather. It's like leave me alone.
Oh, I absolutely resonate. I think it speaks grand lengths to things like masking, right? When we're sort of thinking, why is this person talking to me about this thing that is not relevant whatsoever? But now I have to figure out whether or not this is a rhetorical question or if they actually want to have a small conversation about it, or you know, what am I supposed to say? Do I agree with them? Do I tell
I
them
like
honestly?
in-depth conversations. I have the most deepest conversations with strangers.
Yeah,
I feel like that a
right.
lot of neurodivergent people do that. If you're gonna have like surface level stuff, I'm like, I don't think this relationship is gonna work out. You know what? I wish you all the best. Goodbye.
Yeah, yeah.
Talking about the weather. Don't talk about like what you did for your day, what you had for breakfast. I really don't care. Unless you're gonna get me food. Honestly, I really don't care. I'm like, just get a grip. Like, there's so many things to talk about. Climate change. Actually, that's all the weather. I don't want to talk about that either. Like, I feel the same way. This is gonna sound so bad, but I feel the same way when people like on the street approach you and be like, do you want to donate to charity? And I say, no, thank you. I do not want to do that. And people start laughing myself, and I just like, leave me alone. I don't want you so close to me. It's like these social cues. And I was like,
yeah, no, I really resonate with that one because I find it really pervasive when you get that level of intrusion and it's not invited, and then there is that social pressure to do so when you don't have the context, you don't have the clarity, you don't have information. It may not be something that aligns with your core values. Just because we may not want to donate to an impromptu pop up, sort of like charity request doesn't mean that we don't do really good things in other worlds otherwise. And I think that is a really great example of a lot of things that make that type of engagement challenging for neurodivergent people. And it's such a minefield to have to try and, kind of tiptoe through. And I find it so frustrating as well, because as I say, I don't want to be approached in that capacity, and it's got nothing to do with whether or not I want to donate to charity and do good deeds, but it's got everything to do with how you've approached me, my sensory needs in that moment, whether or not the core values for it align, whether or not I actually
even
know
my stalker's not that close. I don't have a stalker, but even my stalker's not that close. My imaginary stalker's not even that close. Like, take a step back. Like, honestly, it really works me up. Like when I was in, I live in Wimbledon, West Wimbledon, and I go into like centre court or whatever. There'll be people outside. They know me. I give them a look. They know not to mess with me. Like, you come here, they just give them. Yeah, it works.
Wow.
Just these trained people.
Yeah, just some repetition, it should be fun. Yeah, that's really interesting. I find this stuff fascinating as well, because I live in a very rural area, so I can very easily go days without seeing big crowds, and that suits me brilliantly. I'm delighted with that. And then I have an entirely different sensory experience when I go to a really big crowded place, because it's not something that's in my daily to be used to. And I find that really, really interesting, really fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like, do you ever get hyper focused on sensory needs?
Yes. Yeah. Again, more so when they're not being met than when they are, if that makes sense. Like, I find it hard to kind of hyper focus, let's say, on if they are all being met and it is going well, because I'm then enjoying the fact that I'm having my needs met and enjoying that. Whereas if, let's say, I'm not having my sensory needs met, it's all I can think about until I've had them met. So, for example, being cold is one for me. I get cold quite quickly, quite often, and I struggle so much. I can't function. And trying to explain that to someone, is really challenging, because that might be a relatively minor thing for a lot of other people. But to me, it's consuming. I cannot move my hands comfortably. I can't move my body comfortably. I can't think properly, because it is so consuming. And all I can think about and all I can focus on in those moments is, I'm cold, I don't like this, I'm not having fun, I'm not comfortable, I need to get warm. And so, yeah, absolutely.
I feel like, especially when you hyper focus on keeping everything in, I feel like ADHD people, they tick a lot. They, have so many involuntary movements and so much impulsive activity. When I get angry at people, I go really, really silent. And sometimes I scream in the streets. Honestly, I would scream. Once I let it out, I'm fine. I go back to myself. It's like, I feel like people don't realize how much you keep in your body, and will need to get out one way or the other, whether it's physically, like, through screaming, or like, I don't know what other ways there is, but it needs to get out. And I feel like I would like scream randomly, like I would do it in my room. I might like slap myself, and it's like that need for stimulation is so much that I can't function. I can't do anything. This is gonna, like you said, it's gonna consume me, but it's not gonna just consume me for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. It's gonna consume me for the whole day until this problem is sorted.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is gonna impact me, and no medication, no therapy, nothing will sort this out, because there's a need that needs to be met. Like, nothing sort this out until I do whatever I need. That's why a lot of people with autism ADHD headbang. It looks dangerous, but it really isn't. Usually it's very controlled, unless, it goes past a level of control, then it's a bit dangerous. But, it's usually very controlled. You know what a shit feels like. But yeah, I'm like, it's just so much. You'll do anything. Pulling hair out, I do that a lot. Like, when I pull my hair out, it's just like, this feels good, again and again and again. And it's like that it needs to be satisfied. And it's like, what it reminds me of is like 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 trauma. Is like, when you like, your parents are like, your parents could be abusive and they buy you gifts. And as a child, you're like, gifts, 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 gifts. You're like, oh yes. And that, like, puts a little shadow over the trauma. But then the trauma's gonna come back out again. That's like the same thing with hyperfocus. The more you try to put blankets on it, it's just going to pop up again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I could have said Jack in the Box, but I just thought about it after I used it.
I mean, both fish quite well. I totally got what you meant.
Yeah. Do you often, you say your confidence gets affected? I guess confidence comes with self-esteem and self-perception. How can hyperfocus influence, like, emotional regulation?
It's a pretty huge one, really. So hyperfocus can sometimes be another example of a lack of control, a lack of autonomy, so to speak. And if we are struggling to navigate our ADHD or, our neurodivergence, and we lack that sense of internal control, it can sometimes constitute another reinforcement of, oh, look, there's another thing I can't control about myself. And that can absolutely compound and exacerbate those levels of shame and self-consciousness and self-esteem that we may already be struggling with. So it can have quite the devastating impact on us because, internally it's something we're aware of that, again, we can't control perhaps, or we really struggle to navigate. And so that, becomes problematic. And externally as well, it might look like we're, hyper focusing on the wrong things. So, think about how many people might get super hyper focused on their video games or their, kind of like phone games or doom scrolling or, other types of things that maybe in the moment for them very sort of self-soothing, but actually, if we think about it within context, may not be, let's say, the most productive or helpful thing they could be doing. And so it also can add another layer of complication to the dynamics around us with other people, because, they might be looking in and thinking, oh, why can't they just try harder? Or why can't they focus on, something that would be actually helpful? And so, again, really reinforcing that level of, oh, they can't do something, or why can't they just, or they're a failure because of. So it absolutely adds a lot of complexities to something that is already perhaps very difficult for us to try to deal with.
The word that keeps coming up, the two words, is stereotype and misconception. And, it's a massive one. I feel like it's not just this conversation, it's like pretty much every other conversation. It will come up.
Yeah.
And, like, I feel like misconceptions, and stereotypes, the media doesn't help with it. It just exacerbates it. Have you, what do you, I feel like there's a set of challenges that come with these misconceptions.
Yep.
I'm supposed to be lazy at work. I'm supposed to be a terrible employee. I'm supposed to be like on drugs. I'm supposed to be in jail. I'm supposed to like, and it's always negative. It's not like, oh my god, it's a positive. Oh my god, she's a successful person. Like, no, it's some of that. Like, what would you think? Like, this is like a discussion that we both can have. What are the primary challenges that stereotypes about neurodivergent condition pose to individuals, in their professional, educational environments, and how can these barriers be, dismantled? Training, that's all the thing. Training.
Trust me, how long have we got? This is This is one of my sort of really particular passions about doing what I do, because it's something I'm up against every single day, like every single day. And there's no way of being able to sugarcoat it. We're still experiencing, significant amounts of stereotypes and labeling and misinformation, which create devastating consequences. I mean, to the extent where I personally very nearly did not get diagnosed with ADHD because I didn't look like I was struggling, and it looked like I was managing well. And I had to actually challenge the psychiatrist in saying that just because I don't externally appear in these very extreme ways, because I've spent more than 5 years by this point implementing holistic strategies to manage these things, which caused me a great amount of energy expenditure, which lead me to being even more fatigued, does not mean I don't have it. It just means I'm really bloody good at masking it and using strategies and tools to help mitigate some of the devastating consequences. But look at my history, look at my family's history, look at what I'm trying to tell you now about my actual lived personal experience, both internally and externally, and the evidence is there. You can see it clearly. It is irrefutable. But just because I don't look like on a, and also bear in mind that this was on a video, so you couldn't see a lot of my stimming because it was all below camera, right? So this was all video format. Just because I don't look like I have what you perceive to be the stereotypical ADHD, and this again goes back to that, kind of challenge with how impractical the DSM is, doesn't mean I don't have it. And so that is just one personal experience of it. And I've lost count of the amount of times that people will say, oh, but you don't look like you have ADHD, or oh, you're too intelligent to have ADHD, or oh, but you did well at school because you had ADHD. And so, we can really see how devastating some of these impacts can be, because for the individual, what that actually does is it completely invalidates and dismisses their, experience. It completely, indirectly infers to them, do you know what? You might be going through this stuff, but actually we're not going to believe you because it doesn't fit this particular box of what we think it should look like. And so not only does that invalidate the individual, but it absolutely destroys their sense of self-esteem, their sense of self-confidence, their confidence in asking for help. So it might encourage them to continue being hyper independent and hyper vigilant. It might lead them to gaslight themselves and also others, because they're being, again, indirectly told, we can gaslight you and that's actually an okay thing to do. So do you know what? Go right ahead and internalize all of that, gaslight yourself and gaslight everyone around you, because that's an acceptable form of behavior. So it's devastating that we still live in a world with these types of labels and stereotypes, because, again, the very idea that we have of ADHD is based on a very biased, very small control group of young white boys from decades ago. It absolutely fails the vast majority of the population do actually have ADHD. And so the impacts on it can be absolutely devastating, not just for the individual, but also for the people around them, because we don't exist in silos, remember. We're very connected social beings. So if something is impacting one of us as an individual, it's very likely that it's also going to have a knock-on impact on those around us as well.
Definitely. I feel like with my ADHD diagnosis, I had to fight for a good month. I know it feels like a very short amount of time, and it probably was, but being in a psychiatric ward, it was very intense month, which felt like years. And I was like going back and forth. So every single week, I'll be like, I have ADHD. The psychiatrist that you have, the consultant psychiatrist, there's two. One of them has seen me outside on a 136 suite. I'm not in A&E, sorry. And she thought this was going to be it. But because there's this other consultant psychiatrist who's given me an autism diagnosis, she's like, she's the one that gave me, like, she thought I had autism. Anyway, she was like, no, she doesn't have that. She doesn't have that. She's like, fine. No, I'm not. Literally, I'm not. And I had to fight for it all the fucking time. And, one day, I got really, really hyperactive on the ward. I was a bit louder than usual. I'm much more quiet when I'm like in the walls, quieter than usual. And I was really loud and hyperactive. And he said, this guy, if my psychiatric ward friends are watching this, they know Steve. Like Steve came. Yes, Steve, you know, you know who you are. He came and be like, you expect us all? I've never asked anybody to be quiet for me. Never. Once in the psychiatric ward. And then someone, like, literally never. And I was like, you expect everybody else to be quiet, but you're being loud and running around. I couldn't say anything. I started crying immediately and went to go headbang. See myself. And he was like, somebody came to check up on me. And then he came to check up on me to like double her. And I was like, how the, you know, I was about to attack him. I was about to go into, you know, like seclusion because I was nearly attacked him. It's like you can't just, it's like the lack of understanding awareness. And this is in a psychiatric ward. In a child psychiatric ward, I can only speak from my experience, and this is probably go beyond my experience. If a child does not have a diagnosis of autism and ADHD in a psychiatric ward, and you don't have it, you're strange. That's what people think. You're strange because how like everybody else has it, and you don't. Like it's like crazy. It's always been crazy, and having to fight constantly, and people have been treated like that, and you're a health, and they still work in that field. There's so many people that they're very limited. They're not willing to learn. And I feel like if you're not willing to learn, you're in the wrong field. Don't work with people, and you can't even work in the fucking like Tesco's. If you cannot learn to improve, to take on feedback, continuous professional development, this is not for you. It's not just professional, it's also personal development. This job is not for you. And it's Absolutely. Like, and you saw one version of me, and when I'm unmasked is a problem. When I'm masked is a problem. You need to pick which one you want and let me know, because I can't be like, you don't like both, I don't know what to do. Like, it's always a problem. And I'm like, no, like, if somebody like says they have ADHD, most likely they've done a lot of research. Same with autism, they've done a lot of research. They're very, very sure. And they've been thinking about it for quite a while. They're like, you know what? And they have the confidence to go up to someone and be like, ask them. And the person does not take a holistic approach. The person does not take their like intersectionalities into account. You are the problem. Nobody else is the problem. You're the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, it's like it's not worth the fight. That's what it feels like. This fight is not worth fighting for. This is not it.
Absolutely.
Like in America, like, you know, on our already released podcast episode, which was our last podcast episode, not our last, that's episode 43, I think. And this guy, David Gunter, for him to get accommodations, like, or anybody in America to get accommodations, you need a physical piece of paper saying that you have ADHD, you have autism, whatever it is. You can't get accommodations without that. You're gonna put, and it's like ridiculous. Like in the UK, you can get accommodations or reasonable adjustments without official diagnosis. So imagine going through that struggle. Like you need to fight and fight, or even I feel like you don't even have to go that far. Like if we can just stay in the UK, EHCP plans. How much are those mothers, those fathers, those primary caregivers fighting? For a diagnosis for their child.
I think this is another really key point, and I think it speaks to, again, another very stereotypical perspective that we really need to dismantle, which is that people have such a limited view on understanding why people want to seek this clarification. I've been in this field now for over 5 years, and I have never met a single individual who has wanted to put themselves through this arduous, painful, potentially re-triggering, invasive process because they want a get out of jail free card. You know, these parents of children are absolutely in despair and they are crying out for the support that they absolutely deserve and need. These professional individuals who are seeking assessments for clarification are, desperately trying to make sure they don't lose their job or their minds in the process. No one wakes up and goes, do you know what I want to do today? I want to leave my phone in the fridge 6 times, have an absolute meltdown, fail to meet a deadline, and just completely lose all of my friends because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. That's what I want to do today. I love that about me. People don't do that, but I think there's another stereotype that seems to be emerging where the sort of greater population and often quite influenced by the media has this expectation that people are just doing it because it's trendy.
Oh my God, I was about to address that.
This is not fashion show. This is not London Fashion Week. This is people's lives. This is people's difficulties. This is people's real, actual things that they're going through that have a detrimental impact on their day-to-day living that they need some support in. So how about we, move away from judging them with these stereotype labels and work towards maybe believing these people, maybe actually having the audacity to believe that they could just be looking for some support and some clarity.
It's like when people do they might go on This Morning and talk about cancer diagnosis, lumps and stuff like that. And then there's a sudden rise in people getting cancer diagnosis or like checking for whether it's benign or not. Is that not trendy? It's like, oh, I just saw this. I might have it. Oh, let me go get one. I have cancer. Oh my God, great. Why? I feel like there's such a different attitude for physical health, mental health, and cognitive health.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be. All exist within one. And don't.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head there.
It's like I keep using physical health, like whether it's epilepsy, diabetes, and stuff like that, because people take it more seriously. And I'm like, do you know, okay, people are like, oh, but you can die from it. Well, actually, I can die from ADHD. I can die from my autism. If my autism is not my autistic needs are not met, do you know the amount of people that with autism that kill themselves? Do you know the amount of people? This is more common with ADHD, people with ADHD, but not limited to just this, end up in prison or the criminal justice system.
Yep.
Is that trendy? That's trendy? Yeah, oh my God, let me just, some of the crimes they did are not forgivable, certain crimes. Certain crimes, I'm like, you did it, but you didn't ever meet his needs or her needs. So what did you expect to happen?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Sarah Templeton does some incredible campaigning work around this because you're quite right. And her entire work's passion is dedicated to doing something about this because the justice system is another institutionalized system in the country that completely fails to take into account the various different ways in which things like neurodivergence can have a major impact on someone's ability to regulate themselves and function in the way that society deems, acceptable. And it's something that absolutely needs to be factored into account because it is something that can impact us. And I think it's another one of those things that people want to kind of skirt around because it's an uncomfortable topic. But I'm glad you brought it up because, you're absolutely right. You can die from your autism and ADHD, not necessarily in the direct way that people typically expect it, but as a result of not having your needs met. I mean, there is a worrying amount of people that die by suicide in things like psychiatric wards or receiving psychiatric care because the neurodivergent needs are not met. It's a crisis and it needs to be talked about. It needs to get better understanding, and it absolutely needs to start with dismantling the labels that kind of perpetuate, these stereotypes in the first place.
Nowhere in England is there autism care. And I'm like, they might have the Autism National Service, specialist service, but that's more advocacy work and very limited to, it's just I feel like there's not proper services. Occupational therapy is great, but that's going to solve some aspect, but it's a whole, and I feel like it's just people are not going to realize, the amount of people in the psychiatric wards that are neurodivergent is ridiculous. They're not supposed to be there. You cannot we can't find a service, like find as in like create a service at all. You can't create a service at all for somebody with autism. So these people end up in the psychiatric wards, and then you wonder why there's not enough beds left. There's not enough beds left. Because you're putting people who need community care in the psychiatric wards because you just don't know what to do with them.
And
I understand when it's a last resort. But it's never a last resort. It's like, oh, here they come again. I can't just keep discharging them because it just looks bad on me. Sign it off into the psychiatric ward. Trust me, these professionals have made their mind up. I understand when it's a very severe, like when I walked in front of the tracks, I understood like why one professional came to see me and I got sectioned straight away. Like, you know, but if they're like, I don't know, run across the road, it's still dangerous, but the severity is a bit lower, they might be like, okay, back into the community. But the community is where they're supposed to be, but the community is not working. So what are you going to do about it? They just sit around and do nothing about it. You have, like, and the thing is, people think like local authorities and governments don't have money. They can find the money when it comes to it. Like, if we're going to talk about it, like, oh, foreign aid, I know we like to keep good relationships with other countries. Important to our, like, economy, GDP, right. But nothing against Ukraine. But £3 billion is going towards that. That £3 billion that can be allocated. You cannot, it's like, I feel like I used this phrase in another podcast episode. A country can't keep filling other people's cup when its own cup cannot be filled.
Oh, what a beautiful use of that analogy. We have no cup left. I mean, we don't even have a cup at this point. We don't even have an empty cup. We gave the cup away. We don't even
have somewhere to put the cup.
Yeah, I think you're quite right, and I couldn't agree more. And it's so difficult because it's not necessarily a case of saying that those things don't matter. They absolutely do. And these things matter too. And I think there's just so much sweeping under the rug and, you know, kind of gaslighting, minimizing, diminishing, don't talk about this, you know, we'll kind of keep it quiet. And again, it goes back to the stigmas and the stereotypes and the labels. You know, if we at the top end of our organizational structures and frameworks still view things like mental health and neurodevelopmental health and, you know, cognitive health in a very stigmatized fashion, then we are never going to get the inclusion we need, the funding we need, the support we need to make society, make these spaces a more inclusive, you know, environment for the people that really, really need it. And yeah, that's a real shame.
And it just needs to be, I feel like people need to rethink, because the autism diagnosis it was discovered in the 1980s.
Oh, yes, I would like to say, or the first communities for autism started developing in the 80s and 90s, and it may have been started to be recognized slightly before that.
Yeah. But even that, I'm like, it's over 50 years. Yeah. And you're nearly over 50 years and you're still doing nothing.
Yeah.
I feel like, and they're going to be like, oh, it's just an epidemic. It's not an epidemic, it's a pandemic. And people are not going to realize it because it doesn't affect every single person. And I feel like that's what the way the human brain is designed. It's like, it's always in survival mode. You can only think for yourself, but you can't think for other people. You know, with divergent people actually can. But, you know, that's a different conversation. I don't know what you... This is why we need more neurodivergent people in power.
Yep, I heartily agree. We need to champion neurodivergency and neuroinclusion in every single space, whether that's the health sector, the political sector. We need this level of diversity so that we have voices and representation in all of these different spaces, because otherwise we've just got echo chambers. And it's so exhausting because you're having the same conversations with the same people and affecting no real change. And all the while that's happening, other things are disintegrating around us and making it even harder and creating even more barriers. So, yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I feel like, you know, people in politics, they'll be like, My mother's in the NHS. My mother worked in the NHS. My father did this in the NHS. My parents were working class. Then act like it when you're making policies. Like if your parents worked for the NHS, give it funding. Give it the 22% pay rise. That's a good start. It's better than the 1% that was, I think, last year or the year before. Better than 1%. But still. Like, yeah, it's like even I can't go to a normal dentist. Not a normal dentist, like it's a non-specialist dentist. A lot of people are hesitant to do work on me because they're scared on how I'm going to react. And you know, King's College University, King's College Hospital, they have a specialist dentist. I've been on the waiting list for 3 years now. And it's long. And you know, that's the only place in London, I think even England. Might as well go too risky, but it could be the UK, but I'm definitely staying with England. It's like there's so many autistic people. That one service won't even like help a fifth of the population of people with autism in London.
Yeah, fraction, a literal fraction.
Yeah, do better.
Absolutely, yes.
I love how this episode like naturally ended. Like,
do better, and we'll be back next time.
This wraps up part 2 of our discussion with Beth Thomas. Stay tuned for part 3, where Beth will explore practical strategies for ADHD coaching and how they can make a transformable impact.